Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this installment, let's break down that fateful fight of Pyrrha vs. Cinder from Season 3, the volume where the whole series underwent a drastic shift, for better or worse, depending on who you ask. So let's analyze the details of this scenario before we get into the fight proper. Unlike the previous analysis, both Pyrrha and Cinder are playing for keeps here. Cinder is aiming to kill Pyrrha, and Pyrrha is doing likewise for her. This means that it's no holds barred, anything goes. But unfortunately, the odds are in Cinder's favor. She's got the powers of the Fall Maiden, which to this day we still don't know the upper limits of. On top of that, while she did have to fight Ozpin, that fight didn't seem to last all that long. I have to question how she was able to so easily beat Ozma after she had only just gotten the maiden powers, but he's implied to have been getting weaker over time, so that's my best guess as to how that happened. On top of that, Pyrrha doesn't have her head completely in the game. The psychological damage that she went through just hours before of her involuntary manslaughter of Penny visibly rocked her, and I'm inclined to believe that she didn't think she was going to win here. For reference, manslaughter isn't a planned thing, while murder is. Involuntary manslaughter is when you accidentally kill someone. Just remember how she got rid of Jean before she went off to fight Cinder. She wanted him out of harm's way, where he wouldn't be able to try and help her, right after she saw that Ozpin, the one who was supposed to be stronger than any of the students, die. I don't think she had any anticipation of coming out alive. Morale is a huge factor. Low morale means that you can't give it your all. Pyrrha's morale is probably as low as it ever was in her life, while Cinder's is at an all-time high after getting the maiden powers and killing Ozma. Then there's the fact that Pyrrha used her semblance to an extreme degree just before this fight to move the damaged elevator. To recap, the aura protecting someone is also used to power their semblance. Pyrrha displayed visible strain to lift the elevator, meaning that she has less of a shield to protect her. Ozma didn't even manage to hit Cinder all that much during their brief exchange, so she's mostly fresh. The maiden powers seem to operate independently of aura, so your guess is as good as mine as to how much they can wield. Could Cinder just blast fire indefinitely? Probably not, but we still have no clear rules on that front. But let's take a look at this fight, shall we? So that elevator wasn't quiet. Cinder knows that someone's about to come out of it to attack her. Pyrrha does a smart move of immediately throwing her weapon to distract Cinder. Normally, I'm against throwing your weapon if it's the only one you have, but Pyrrha can recall it back via her semblance. This buys her time to get out of the elevator, which is a choke point. For those not aware, a choke point is a narrow space that an enemy has to pass through, meaning that they don't have room to maneuver. Throwing her weapon forced Cinder to react to it, buying her time to get out of the choke point. Notice how the weapon was spinning end over end too, instead of flying straight forward like a javelin. Pyrrha wouldn't have had space to properly throw it like she would normally, so it makes sense for her to throw it that way. It's a nice little detail that one could easily miss. She then manages to advance in a rather unorthodox fashion, but she's still able to use the shield to protect herself, so props for that. As I mentioned in my armor video, if more characters wore gear to protect themselves, it would let their aura last much longer. The pair then have a short stare down. Cinder obviously doesn't consider Pyrrha a real threat here, and it shows on her smug expression. She's toying with her. Pyrrha, on the other hand, is gathering information. Remember that her information of the maidens is extremely limited at this point, and so she'll want to figure out just what Cinder's capable of. Cinder opens up with a few flame blasts, which Pyrrha is able to dodge. Right now, she has the advantage of range. This space doesn't provide anything in the way of cover, so all Pyrrha can do right now is evade while attempting to close the distance. Switching her weapon into its rifle configuration might help, but it would take a few precious moments, and if Cinder rushes her, then that mode will be much less useful. Cinder is also gathering information here. Seeing how your opponent reacts to attacks is a great way to gauge what strategies may or may not work against them. That's why fighters will oftentimes throw out feints before engaging, just to see what their enemy is going to do. Will they back away, or will they rush you? Will they counter, reposition, or block? All of this is valuable insight, but Pyrrha then uses her shield to block the flames. That's the thing about temperature-based damage. It takes a bit to start working. Heat and cold aren't instantly damaging unless it's extreme and has direct contact with you. That's why you can put your hand through an open flame without being hurt. The fire isn't in contact with you long enough to heat up your hand too much. On top of that, Pyrrha has a shield to protect her in addition to her remaining aura. She can tank a bit of damage still. Her follow-up strike isn't something I'd have recommended though. She could have simply thrust her weapon forward instead of spinning around like that. It would have been faster and harder to see coming, especially with a reverse grip. I despise reverse grips. It's worse in every conceivable way, and only becomes viable with very short blades in very close proximity. Even then, it's not better than a normal grip, it's only viable. There's a reason our ancestors never held swords or maces that way. It's genuinely rubbish. But Cinder's able to counter by grabbing the blade, then blasting her away with a palm strike. Now, some might say, you can't grab a blade, it'll cut your hand. That's not entirely true. A blade will require some sliding motion to properly cut like that, so if you hold it in place, any damage to your hand will be minimal. While stopping a direct strike like that wouldn't work in real life, Cinder does still have her aura. That allows her to get away with something like this. This also demonstrates the concept of duels in centuries gone by. Dual wielding was common there, with one weapon being used to block or parry an opponent's strike, while your other could then attack. Cinder's still playing with Pyrrha though, as she doesn't make a move while Pyrrha's stunned after she hits the wall. Instead, she lets her get back on her feet before rushing her, but Pyrrha's able to stuff the charge and then throws Cinder. It's debatable if she had the proper leverage, but if we take a look, Pyrrha manages to plant her feet on the ground while she still had a hold of Cinder's shoulder. To clarify, some of the major balance points of the human body are the feet, hips, shoulders, and head. Putting any of these too far out of alignment will cause your opponent to stumble or fall. Pyrrha's got her feet planted, while Cinder's been caught off guard and hers leave the ground, and Pyrrha uses that balance point of Cinder's shoulder to get leverage on her. Unlike most characters in the Aesop's fight, Pyrrha then capitalizes on this by following up on the throw, smashing into Cinder with her shield. She probably would have done more damage with the sword, as the force would have been focused into a single point, rather than across the whole surface of the shield, but it's still a good move. What isn't so good is that her following attacks have needless spins to them. This gives Cinder more time to react, whereas simple thrusts would have been much more likely to hit. She does appear to score a few glancing blows, but nothing to do any noticeable damage. Cinder then manages to kick her away, and Pyrrha once again uses the strategy of throwing her weapons at her to distract her. Cinder has to take action against this move, as otherwise they could potentially do her actual harm. This then buys Pyrrha time to recover and tackle her. This is how most fistfights end in the real world. Grappling is almost always a surefire way to get an opponent to submit or deal damage by dislocating something. But oddly, Pyrrha has her weapon in hand again after she had just thrown it. When did she have time to get it back? We then have a standoff, with Pyrrha trying to draw her blade across Cinder's throat. Again, grabbing a static blade is unlikely to do any real harm, so Cinder's position isn't unrealistic. But unfortunately, Pyrrha's arm is blocking Cinder's throat. She'd have to hook her forearm underneath Cinder's chin and pull back to get more control. Cinder also could strike with either her head or her feet here. Just because your arms are restrained doesn't mean that you're helpless. Kicks, stomps, and headbutts hurt, and can allow you to get out of some sticky situations. But Cinder uses two abilities here that she hasn't made use of much, if at all, in more recent seasons. She uses her semblance to heat up Pyrrha's weapon until it breaks, surprising her and giving Cinder the chance to break free. She also seems to communicate to the Wyvern somehow, getting it to smash the office apart. This seems to have left Pyrrha dazed, as she struggles to reach for her shield. Cinder is still gloating, just floating there and watching her. But now, the environment has been altered. There's now a ton of exposed metal, which Pyrrha can directly manipulate. Once again, she buys herself some time by hurling a gear at Cinder, which lets her get back on her feet. Cinder blasts away with fire once more, but Pyrrha's mostly recovered by now, and can evade again. Unfortunately, Pyrrha's down a weapon. Striking with a shield can do damage, but it's generally not enough to be lethal unless you hit them numerous times. In homage to her Greek aesthetics, Pyrrha throws her shield like a discus, but Cinder still hasn't learned. She just relies on raw power to get her through her fights without employing strategy. Several times, Pyrrha has distracted her by throwing her weapons, but Cinder just won't pick up on it. That throw let Pyrrha set up an attack using the rubble around her to crush Cinder. She was only able to just barely save herself from that. The only downside is that Pyrrha's been using her semblance to a heavy degree in this fight, and so that will directly deplete her aura shield, which will have dire consequences. Cinder manages to blast the gears away, but one strikes Pyrrha, and we can see her aura flicker in response. Not a good sign. But after a cutaway, we cut back to this fight, and Cinder has materialized her bow, which she's neglected for quite some time. And she does something that I've always had an issue with. Once again, Pyrrha hurls her shield, but Cinder's arrow breaks apart around it and then reforms, its trajectory unaffected. I'm sorry, but what? The only way that works is if you have some sort of telekinesis. If she could do that, why not just scatter sand on the ground and create glass spikes to spear your enemies on? That level of power is beyond anything she's demonstrated since, and it really feels like it was created to just end Pyrrha. The arrow pierces Pyrrha's ankle, indicating that her aura must be broken. That's pretty much game. Adrenaline might let you stand on that foot for a bit, but even that won't last forever. This is the downside of being a bipedal species. If something happens to one leg, we're done.
It's unfortunate you were promised a power that was never truly yours. But take comfort in knowing.
Again, Cinder gloats. She taunts Pyrrha, but I have to say, she's in striking range of your arms and your head. Even if you've lost the fight, Pyrrha, go down swinging, hit her. Don't go out on a whimper. But then Cinder puts an arrow through Pyrrha's heart, and in so doing put a metaphorical one through mine. Pyrrha, Penny, and Yang were my favorite characters in the first 3 seasons. Unfortunately, 2 of them are dead, and Yang isn't the same character that I used to like. Heart wounds kill pretty quickly. This is what agitates me when people scream about hunting being inhumane. I've never been, but from what those who have been have told me, is that you aim for the heart. It's a fairly quick death, and is much more merciful than anything a predator will do. Let me specify that this is from the perspective of those who hunt for food. Trophy hunters are absolute scum. But Cinder does something that we've never seen her do before or since. She touches Pyrrha, and Pyrrha sort of dissolves. Normally, that only happens with inanimate objects or Grimm. I can only assume that this was done for dramatic effect, as nothing seems to have come of it. All in all, though, this scene was fairly well choreographed. The move with the arrow was contrived, but everything else was pretty solid. This fight was a nice mix of Monty's earlier style meshed with what would come later. Monty's fights had a tendency to have characters blink around and have insane levels of movement that don't really mesh with what their abilities seem to be. Like, RWBY is supposed to be able to move at super speeds, but in earlier seasons characters would zip about without any such power, making speed semblances seem redundant. Later fights aren't as well choreographed, with characters often just standing around like they don't exist if they aren't in frame. This fight, though, was a nice blend of the best of both styles. Cinder seems like she was handcrafted to counter Pyrrha, though. Think about it. Pyrrha's semblance is incredibly powerful. She's been shown to be able to manipulate even non-ferrous metals with ease. Even something as simple as a belt buckle would let her attack someone. Just rip it away and have it shoot into their face at high speed. Destroying an enemy's weapon would also be easy for her. Metals used in so much in both our world and Remnant that human or faunus opponents are naturally at a disadvantage against her. Cinder only wears a simple dress here, and her weapon is made of glass using her semblance. That gives Pyrrha nothing to work with on her person. Even characters like Adam or Ironwood would have been able to be directly weakened by her powers. But overall, this fight, though ending on a depressing note, was well made. There was clearly effort put in to make sure certain principles of physics and strategy were implemented, which have fallen by the wayside in recent volumes. But what did you think about this fight? How does it hold up after all this time, and compared to more recent sequences? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this video entertaining or informative, feel free to leave a like if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. And may you all have a weapon in each hand.